along with with good bikes and a good brand, you need good ambassadors on your products. And obviously, you mentioned Win before. I think Win's a great ambassador for the brand. All the stuff he does. You've had the downhill um, race team this year. With Danny Hart having success on the downhill bike. And then you've got other athletes in other areas. Is there like going to be a budget to focus on certain, you know, um, new potential athletes in different parts of the sport?
That's a great question, and I am still waiting for you to send your CV in as a rider, for consideration.
Well,
Uh,
a lot of people in their 40s and 50s are probably the customers, aren't they? So yeah, I'm a great ambassador.
Hey, listen, you're talking to the guy that pays Hans Ray's wages, right? So I know all about riders at different ages, and this year, I think Hans has been with GT this year for 37 years. It's like the longest. We were
Great.
trying to we were trying to figure out if there is a longer standing sponsorship between an athlete and a brand, or a rider and a brand. The only one we can think of is maybe Steve Caballero and Vans. That's the only one that we can think might be a longer relationship than Hans Ray's Hans Ray riding for GT. But you're right. You're right. Athletes, ambassadors, they are still really important, especially in the world we live in today with social and everything else. And at GT, I sort of came in and inherited a year ago a pretty heavy rider roster. And with reduced budgets and inheriting a big rider roster, it really sort of limited our ability to take on new teams and athletes. Not to say that the people that we inherited weren't some of the best riders in the world. We got, like you said, Win, Hans, Braga Vestovic, who's, like the free ride, you know, demigod. Um, Tyler McCall, David Lieb. So there's a really strong rider roster on the mountain bike side. And we've got a really long-standing BMX freestyle squad. And then obviously in the UK, I was, supporting Kai White in BMX race at an Olympic level for the last 7 years. So it was a real great mix of riders. And if anything, I would say that maybe GT's athletes and ambassadors, teams and riders were probably more than the brand needed or could afford, but we still knew that it was really important to have this kind of global wrecking crew with riders that help different markets. So, say for example, Braga up in Norway, up in the Nordics. There's an event we do up there with the Tresol Bike Park that GT sponsor, and there's the B Rage event, and I was out there maybe 6 weeks ago, and honestly, this thing is nuts.
I didn't
There's
have
tw
follow it on Instagram.
Mate, there's 12. The kid that did that drop. So last year, that big ladder drop, I think it's about a foot wide, and it goes out about 30 feet, and it just drops, I think, like 50 feet. And last year, I think six or eight people did it last year, and I think there was five like crashes or broken bikes. It's that gnarly. So this year they made the landing a little bit less aggressive. And there was only one kid that did it this year, and he was a 16-year-old kid on a entry level 140 mil alloy GT sensor, and the kid just nailed it. So up there's all these young rad kids, and they all basically, because of the Braga effect and the bike park effect, they're all riding GTs and they all love GTs. So it's really important that we have these like regional ambassadors. So
Then
Braga's awesome. What Win has done this year with Win TV and the Privateer project has been unbelievable. I've been lucky enough to go to a few World Cups and sort of help and hang out. And honestly, like I would say that Win is the hardest working guy in the bike industry. He just does not stop. Like especially when there's a World Cup weekend, he is like on it all the time, like maximum effort. So we're really lucky that we have riders and athletes and ambassadors like Win and Braga and T Mac, all these guys. T Mac's been with GT now for 16, 17 years. And then obviously this year we didn't have the budget to really support additional teams and athletes, but Danny contacted us late last year, and we were talking to Danny's team about helping them out.
Mhm.
And then and then it kind of went quiet because like Mark Cumming that runs that team, he was kind of assured that the Nuke Proof were still going to support the team. And everybody knows that Danny was riding a Nuke Proof in the off season last year. And then obviously earlier this year, the wheels came off with chain reaction, as you know, mate, because you were part of the fallout, right? So we had a sort of last minute, I think it was, I don't know, might have been even as late as February where did it happen in February this year? I'm just trying to think when it happened.
The final nail in the coffin was February, yeah.
Yeah, so at that point, Mark and Danny contacted us and said, look, the nuke proof deal had fallen through, and we had actually already committed to supporting an Italian team called Rogue Racing,
Mhm.
because we needed to have a team at World Cup level so that Win could have a base for privateer project.
Sure.
So we basically supported this team. It's run by a guy called Leo. He runs an unbelievably tight team, on a really good, really small budget, and he's got some great riders like Davide Palazzari, who's an Italian national champion. And so we supported him and plugged Win in. And then Mark and Danny came back and said, "Look, we'd love to do something with you." And I was like, "Dudes, we just haven't like the ship has sailed. We're now supporting this team
Yeah.
with product and some funding. We just don't have the budget to do it in such a tight year when there isn't extra budget. So we ended up sort of agreeing to support them like with product because Mark had other sponsors that were contributing towards the cost of the team.
Yeah.
But it was always, I mean, even supplying a team at that level with product is still, 40, 50 grand product investment, right? Product value. And then Danny needs a custom bike for the Worlds, and that's a 1,500 quid paint job. So it's still cash that
Yeah.
isn't budgeted, and it's tough to find. But you don't you don't turn up you don't turn down the opportunity to get on board with a rider of Danny's caliber.
Yeah.
But also Danny was pretty confident that he liked the bike and did well on the bike, and I've actually heard that from a couple of other riders. I heard somebody contacted me recently and about sponsorship for next year, and I said, "Oh, like, am I the last brand you're calling?" Everybody else has said they haven't got any budget. So yeah, this rider said he wanted to ride the GT the way that Ethan got second at Mount St. Anne, and he went off. He basically said he was standing by that Stevie Smith drop, and basically Ethan went off there like better than anybody, and this other rider thought that the bike was actually part of that.
Yeah.
Um, and everybody was sort of citing that Ryan Pinkerton and Ethan had a killer year last year on GTs.
Yeah, people notice that for sure.
Yeah, so Danny was confident he could do well on it. So despite the fact we didn't really have the budget, I kind of jiggled things around a little bit, and we got on board with them. And yeah, we've had a awesome year working with Mark, who runs the team, and Harry Malloy, and Veronica, and Chris Cumming, Dale, who is Danny's mechanic, who obviously from Nuke Proof. It's been really interesting working with them, and Danny missing a world's win, his third world's win by 0.28 seconds. I mean, that was nuts. So that's been really good. I mean, I was talking to Danny this week because we're trying to sort him out with a little bit of a sort of end of year thank you for all the hard work he's done. But that team next year with all the changes with the World Cup teams at the moment, I don't even know if we will be in World Cup racing next year. We're talking to several teams. We know that it's pretty tough for brands. I'd like to keep my foot in it if we can, but if we can't, there's so much other stuff going on. And I think because of the way that Warner Brothers and UCI are going with World Cups, with making it more more elite, I think that you'll see below that the other events becoming more important for brands, more elevated. So the Monster Series in the US with the US Open, the IXS Series, those urban downhills, man, they are really, really gathering pace and getting some traction. So next year we might be in World Cup racing. We might not, but outside of racing, the whole free ride thing. This year at Rampage, we had uh, Tommy G and Team Rampage. Uh, T Mac got third. Tommy G had one of the sort of coolest stories of Rampage, where you see when he crashed and his bike just disappeared off the
Yeah,
off the cliff,
yeah,
and then it landed and bounced and went down more, and landed and bounced and went down more.
yeah,
And we'd done a special bike for Rampage for Tommy G, and I sent it. He lives in a really remote part of south of France,
right,
and I sent it to him uh, on like a kind of FedEx overnight to get it there for him. And it took over a week to get there, and he'd already left for Rampage by the time it got there. So we actually did another one in the US because it had a ride wrap on it, and then we
right,
sent it down to Utah and had it all built for him. So he had this super cool bike, but because he hadn't practiced on it, he wanted to stick on his other bike, and
right,
that's the bike that fell off the cliff. And
right,
then and then Jason, our MD, was actually out in Utah,
yeah,
and they got the bike and inspected it, and Jason said, "Well, it's just fallen 50 foot off a cliff, but I can't actually see any damage. But I would recommend you ride your spare bike just in case." And Tommy G said, "No, I'm used to this one. I want to ride this one." So he did his second run on the same bike. And
right,
obviously we had a you know, bit of a butt clench moment because you don't know what's going on inside the frame if it's just falling 50 foot off a cliff, but it was totally fine. So
brilliant.
so to summarize all that, athletes and riders and teams, I think they're super important in validating your product, showcasing your product. Uh, and I think GT will always be connected to some of the best riders. If you look through the history, you've already mentioned it,
Yeah,
Nico, PE, Mike King, all these people. I think the modern day people that we have are, maybe not uh, some of them in racing. Maybe we haven't got a Bruni or a Finn or whatever,
yeah,
but I think the characters that we've got and the success that we've had with Privateer Project with helping bring through like new talent. I mean, if you look at a lot of the riders, like Ronan, he was on the Privateer Project for an event. So I think that program really feels like giving back to the sport and bringing new riders through. And I think maybe that is more important nowadays than winning the World Cup, because back in our day, if Nico would win that, because there was no internet and magazines, you that really had an impact on sales. And also there was far fewer bike brands back then, right? So if Nico went and won a World Cup, people would want to buy, LTS Lobos or LTS DHs or whatever.
yeah,
And nowadays that doesn't really happen. Like a rider can go and win a World Cup, and it doesn't really make a huge difference in sales, but it does give you like a compelling storytelling opportunity. And I think really that's the modern day of marketing that we're in, is that when these riders go and do these great things, you're just making a cool story out of it. And that story builds your brand and resonates with people, makes them feel warm and fluffy about your brand. And then when they're in the market for a bike, they remember they feel good about GT.